Naming my newborn daughter Margaret was meant to honor my husband's beloved grandmother, but instead, it tore open a hidden wound in my family, one I never saw coming. When I held my daughter for the first time, she was perfect. A tuft of soft, dark hair, eyes that blinked curiously up at me, and tiny fingers that instinctively wrapped around my thumb. I'd been nervous about her name, unsure of how my parents would react since I kept it a secret until her birth. Margaret wasn't just a name my husband and I liked, it was a tribute to his late grandmother, the woman who had been his rock during his most formative years. I hoped everyone would embrace the significance and feel the love it symbolized. But that first reaction I saw on my mom's face was strange. The day after I gave birth, I sensed something was off. My mom, who usually called me every day, had been distant, only texting quick, impersonal messages. In the hospital, she had seemed a bit pale when I mentioned Margaret's name, but I thought it was just the emotions of becoming a grandmother. When I called my sister Emily to come over to my place, I was hoping she could shed some light on what was happening, but the truth was far more than I expected. Mom's been in her room all day, Emily explained cautiously, her face taut with worry. She and Dad had a huge argument after you left. I overheard a bit of it. What did they fight about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Somehow I knew I was about to hear something that would change everything. Emily hesitated, glancing at Margaret, who was nestled in her bassinet. She took a deep breath before finally saying, "It's the name Amelia." Margaret was the name of Dad's affair partner. Time seemed to stand still. I couldn't breathe, and I could barely process what I'd just heard. My father had had an affair, and with a woman named Margaret, I felt like the world was spinning, and I was helplessly caught in the whirlwind. My father, who had always been my guiding light, the man who never missed a recital or a game, who taught me to ride a bike, who was there for every scraped knee and heartbreak. He'd betrayed my mother? Emily continued, her voice barely a whisper. It happened about 10 years ago. They never told us. I guess they thought it was best to move past it quietly. Just as she finished, there was a knock on the door, and my father walked in, his face ashen. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, and in that moment, I could see the weight of his guilt. "Amelia," he started, his voice cracking. "Please, can we talk about the name?" I crossed my arms and looked at him steadily. "Why don't you tell me why it bothers you so much, Dad?" He paused, glancing at Emily, who was glaring at him, and then he sighed. Margaret was someone I was involved with years ago. It was a mistake, one I've regretted ever since. Your mother and I moved on, but that name brings back memories for her. Painful memories. The room was silent. I felt a storm of emotions churning inside me. Anger, disbelief, sadness. I took a shaky breath and replied, "I'm not changing her name, Dad. Margaret was the name of my husband's grandmother, who raised him when his mother couldn't. She sacrificed so much for him, and this is our way of honoring her." My father's shoulders slumped, and his voice grew desperate. "Amelia, please. Your mother, she's packing her bags. She said she can't stay if she has to hear that name every day." A surge of frustration bubbled up inside me, and I couldn't contain it any longer. "You're the one who did this, Dad. You betrayed her, not me. You need to take responsibility instead of asking me to change the name of my daughter to fix a mistake you made." Emily, who had been silently seething, finally lost her patience. "Get out, Dad. Don't you dare put this on Amelia. She didn't do anything wrong, and you have no right to come here and guilt trip her like this." Without another word, my father turned and walked out, his shoulders hunched as if bearing the weight of a lifetime of regrets. As soon as he left, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I leaned back, and Emily reached out, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Over the next few days, the silence from my mom was deafening. She had been so excited about becoming a grandmother, and now her excitement was overshadowed by memories of betrayal. Part of me wanted to reach out to her, to talk, to make things right, but I knew that this was something beyond my control. This was a wound that my father had inflicted, and no matter how much I wanted to heal it, the only thing I could do was wait. Finally, Emily offered to go to our aunt's house, where Mom had been staying, and try to talk some sense into her. I stayed home, trying to keep my mind off things and focus on my newborn. When the doorbell rang later that evening, I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking fragile and tired. "Mom," I began, but she raised her hand, signaling for me to stop. "I'm so sorry, Amelia," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have told you what was going on. I should have explained why I was so distant instead of letting you wonder." We sat down, and she broke down, telling me everything. She explained how she'd found out about the affair all those years ago, how my father had begged her to stay, and how she had reluctantly agreed for the sake of the family. "I didn't want you and Emily to grow up in a broken home," she said, tears streaming down her face. But hearing that name, it brought it all back, Amelia. I felt like I was reliving it all over again. I took her hand, my own heart breaking as I saw her pain. "Mom, if there's another name you'd like to call her, a nickname, I'm open to that. But I can't change her name entirely. This is important to me and my husband." She managed a small smile through her tears and shook her head. "No, I don't want to dishonor the memory of the woman who raised your husband. She must have been a remarkable person, and I don't want my pain to overshadow that." For a moment, it felt like everything was okay. But deep down, I knew that there were deeper wounds, old scars that my mother hadn't fully healed from. I hugged her, hoping that in time the love for her granddaughter would help her move past the painful memories. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on the joy of new motherhood, but the tension with my father lingered. He texted me a few times, trying to explain himself, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. I didn't know how to look at him the same way, knowing what he had done to our family. Then, one evening, Emily came rushing into the house, her face flushed with anger. "Amelia, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice shaking. "I talked to Dad, and Margaret wasn't just a coworker. She was one of his students." My heart stopped. "What?" I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips. Emily nodded, her face twisted in disgust. "She was a high school senior. He was her teacher, Amelia." I felt like I was going to be sick. My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what I had just learned. My father, the man who had taught me about right and wrong, who had been my moral compass, had crossed a line I couldn't even begin to fathom. When I confronted my mother about it, her face crumpled with guilt and shame. "I knew," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew she was his student, but I thought it was a one-time mistake. He convinced me it was a lapse in judgment, and I wanted to believe him. I stayed, hoping things would go back to normal." I took a deep breath, feeling a new wave of betrayal wash over me. "Mom, I can't have my children around him. If you choose to stay with him, I can't keep pretending everything is okay. I need to protect my family." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded. "I understand, Amelia. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I don't want to lose you." In the end, my sister moved in with me, both of us needing the distance from our parents and the chance to build our own lives away from the weight of their mistakes. I held onto the hope that my mother would eventually find the strength to leave, to start fresh. But no matter what happened, I knew one thing for certain. I had to create a new legacy for my daughter, one built on love, respect, and honesty. Margaret would grow up knowing the story of her great-grandmother's sacrifices, a story of resilience and love that would stand as a testament to the strength of women who choose to rise above their circumstances. As for my father, he continued to try reaching out, desperate to rebuild bridges that had long since crumbled. But every time I looked at my daughter, I knew that my loyalty was to her and her future, a future I would protect at all costs, even if it meant leaving my own family in the past. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was living in a fog, moving through the motions of new motherhood while grappling with the weight of my parents' past. Every moment spent with Margaret was precious, a reminder of the good that could emerge from heartbreak, but my thoughts constantly drifted to my mother and father. Each day brought new questions, some of which I struggled to answer on my own. My sister Emily's presence was a blessing. She stepped in as a second pair of hands, helping me with Margaret when I needed a break. But more importantly, she was there as a sounding board. Late at night, When the house was quiet and Margaret had finally drifted off to sleep, Emily and I would sit in the dim glow of the living room talking about everything, our parents, the betrayal, and what the future would look like for us. "It's surreal, you know?" Emily murmured one night, pulling her knees to her chest as she sat on the couch. "I always thought Dad was this rock. I never thought he could do something like this. And to think that Mom kept it all hidden, it's like everything we knew about our family was just an illusion." I nodded, watching the gentle rise and fall of Margaret's chest as she slept in her bassinet. "I know. And the thing is, part of me wants to be angry at Mom for staying, for hiding it. But another part of me, I just feel sad for her. I can't imagine the weight she's been carrying all these years." Emily sighed, a mix of sadness and frustration in her expression. "She stayed for us, I guess. But now, what does that mean for her? For us?" Her words lingered in the air, a painful reminder of the fractured family we were now left with. As the days turned into weeks, I could feel my resolve hardening. I had to confront my parents, not just for my sake, but for Margaret's future. I wanted to make sure I could look her in the eye one day and tell her that I'd done everything to protect her and the values we wanted to pass on. My husband, ever supportive, encouraged me to take my time with the decision. "You're in a unique position now," he said one evening as he cradled Margaret in his arms. "You're her mother, and you get to decide what kind of environment she grows up in. No one else can make that decision for you." His words echoed in my mind as I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. The following weekend, I arranged to meet my parents. I invited my mom to join me first, hoping for a quieter, private conversation to give her a chance to speak without Dad's presence. She hesitated, but eventually agreed, arriving at my house looking visibly drained and fragile. We sat at the dining room table, an untouched cup of tea between us. My mom's hands trembled slightly, and she seemed to brace herself, as though anticipating my words would be too much to bear. "Mom," I began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything you told me, about why you stayed, why you kept it all hidden." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on her teacup. "I did it for you and Emily. I didn't want you to grow up in a broken home, and at the time I thought maybe it was the right decision." "But was it?" I asked gently. "Looking back now, do you think it was worth it? Because from where I'm standing, I'm struggling to see how it helped any of us." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away quickly. "I thought it would give you stability. I thought it would be better for you girls not to know, to have a family that looked whole." I reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "But it wasn't whole, Mom. We grew up with this version of Dad that wasn't real. And now we're the ones left to pick up the pieces." She broke down then, silent sobs shaking her shoulders as she buried her face in her hands. "I know," she choked out. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have done the right thing, but I didn't know how." In that moment, I saw my mother not as the woman who had raised me, but as a person, flawed, vulnerable, and desperate to make sense of her choices. I realized that she had been a victim too, trapped in a situation she didn't know how to escape. "I forgive you, Mom," I whispered, squeezing her hand, "but I can't let this affect Margaret. I have to protect her from the same pain, and that means setting boundaries." She nodded, understanding in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw a spark of determination in her. "I'll get help, Amelia," she promised, her voice firmer. "I'll talk to someone, maybe a counselor. I need to do this for myself and for you." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. I hugged her tightly, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't expected, but I knew there was still one more confrontation left. A week later, I arranged to meet my dad. Emily joined me, her presence a silent source of strength. We met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a neutral place where the memories wouldn't haunt us. My father arrived, looking older, more worn than I had ever seen him. He approached the table cautiously, his eyes flickering between Emily and me, as though he were expecting a verbal assault. "Thank you for meeting with me," he began, his voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Dad, I don't think you understand the damage you've done, not just to Mom, but to Emily and me too. And now Now it's affecting Margaret. This isn't just a mistake you made a decade ago, it's something that's shaping our lives today. He hung his head, his fingers fumbling with the edge of his napkin. I know, Amelia. I regret it every day. But what do you want me to do? I can't change the past. I want you to be honest with yourself, I said, my tone firmer than I expected. You say you regret it, but do you understand the impact? Margaret will grow up without a grandfather if I can't trust you, and right now I don't. His face crumpled, and for the first time I saw a flash of genuine remorse in his eyes. I never wanted it to be like this. I thought I could fix it somehow, make things right. Then prove it, Emily interjected, her voice cold and steady. Go to counseling. Fix whatever made you think it was okay to betray our family like that. Because if you don't, we can't be part of your life. The silence that followed was heavy, but in that moment, I felt a sense of relief. It was clear that my father's journey was his own, and whether he chose to take responsibility was up to him. For the first time, I understood that I couldn't fix him or his mistakes. All I could do was protect my daughter and create a better future for her. In the months that followed, there were small but significant changes. My mother began counseling, working through years of unprocessed pain. She visited regularly, and though we didn't talk about my father, there was an unspoken understanding that she was trying to rebuild herself from the ground up. Each visit, she seemed a little stronger, a little more at peace. My father, on the other hand, stayed away. He sent cards and letters, messages of apology, but I never replied. I needed time to heal, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Perhaps one day, I'd be ready to open that door again. But for now, I was focused on the life I was building with Margaret. As I rocked Margaret to sleep one quiet evening, I whispered stories of her great-grandmother, of the sacrifices she had made, the love she had shown. I wanted Margaret to know that her name was a symbol of resilience, a tribute to a woman who had given everything for family. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how fractured my own family had become, I could give Margaret the strength and love she deserved. Our journey was far from over, but as I held my daughter close, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I would carry the lessons of the past, honoring the good and learning from the bad, to create a future where Margaret could grow up surrounded by honesty, love, and unwavering support. Commentary: this story of naming a child in honor of a loved one has an incredibly poignant twist, showing how the choices we make, even with the best intentions, can reveal hidden truths and unravel deeply held secrets. Amelia's decision to name her daughter Margaret wasn't just about honoring her husband's beloved grandmother. It was a tribute to resilience, sacrifice, and love. But the choice unwittingly opened a painful chapter in her own family's history, revealing wounds that had never truly healed. The discovery of her father's betrayal, and the full extent of it, would be devastating for anyone. Amelia is forced to confront not only her father's affair, but also her mother's suffering in silence, a decision her mother made to protect the family. Her parents' choice to hide the affair for the sake of stability makes Amelia's situation all the more heart-wrenching. She's left with the responsibility of balancing her own integrity with the love she holds for her family, even as she protects her daughter from repeating the same cycle of deception. Amelia's strength and compassion stand out in her willingness to forgive her mother, to support her through counseling, and to give her the chance to heal. At the same time, Amelia's refusal to simply sweep her father's betrayal under the rug is a testament to her courage and her commitment to creating a better environment for Margaret. This story is a powerful reminder of the strength it takes to break from the past and redefine family on one's own terms. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt journey of resilience, healing, and transformation. If you found Amelia's story moving, be sure to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that explore the strength it takes to navigate complex family dynamics. See you in the next one!